And to everyone here temporally in the same time as us and those watching in video, welcome to the Assembly Line Project. If you look around to see your fellow members here, this is a mix of both my class and Quentin's class. We're both using this as an option for people to do for their final projects in both of our classes respectively. I think we have very similar rubrics and expectations about how this will fit into producing a final project. We're not going to talk about that here today. We're putting on our hats as the assembly line folks, which is to say that we are your external partners or clients or however you're talking about it in your class that you would be working with to move your final project forward. And so in that role, we'll be talking to you about the processes that we implement in the assembly line project. You should know that these all parallel rather well the rubrics that we have in our classes. We don't want to get, if you have questions about grading and that sort of stuff, that's things for Quentin and I later. But this is just about the mechanics of working on stuff inside the assembly line project, which you should know is not just the folks on this call or the folks working in our classes. We have folks from all over the world working on this project. So we have folks across 5 continents, 10 different time zones. And so one of the things we're going to try to do is have this group integrate more with that larger volunteer group, which means putting aside any individual competition feelings you might have. So there is no, in neither Quentin's class or my class, because we're small enough, there is no mandatory curve. So you are not competing against each other for anything. So we want everyone to feel like they're on a team together, even though you will have a finely delineated project that you're working on. The entire team is there to help you succeed. So that is my preface. And with that, Quentin, where do you want to jump into the Trello boards? Do you want to share a screen or should I share a screen?
Either way, I'm happy to share or not. So yeah, maybe just like a really high level overview. I think like the very first thing we want to talk with you about is the Trello board, because that's where we want all of your work to be visible. So we're going to show you, I think everyone got invited to the Trello board. It looked like a lot of you had already joined, but some of you haven't. I want to make sure that you all get to do that. Because one thing we're going to try to do this morning is to have you all add a card for your form to the Trello board. And then you'll really get to start a little bit of a kickstart for actually working on the project, because that's something you'll be doing a lot, is touching that card and moving it along through its workflow.
So can we get a positive indication from everyone who has joined the Trello team? Thumbs up or some indication. If you don't have video on, you can use the little reaction thumb up. All right, so then I think the first thing we need to do is let's paste the link to the invite in the chat here. Okay.
Yeah, I assume it won't cause any problems if you've already gotten the invite a different way. But.
All right, so in the Zoom chat, there is now a link to the Trello team, which has a collection of 3 boards. You should be able to follow that. So just take a moment, if you haven't already, follow that and join the boards. For those of you watching at home, this link should be available in your respective Slack channels. So the one thing is we're going to ask everyone to join the A to J Slack team, which has a assembly line channel, and this link is definitely in that assembly line channel. So we'll just wait till everyone gets there. While everyone's getting there, maybe some words on other things that you're going to want to have already. Does everyone have and not necessarily for today following along, but things that you're going to need to have a GitHub account. How many folks have a GitHub account? Okay. For those of you who don't, it's something you're going to want to set up. Again, I don't think we're going to get to that point today, but that's something you're going to want to set up. You all of these things were in the invite. Did we mention the GitHub account in the calendar invite? I can't remember. Maybe not. Trello board definitely is there.
So Chris, this is a good question for people who might be watching the recording later. So Slack, the way Slack works for each workspace, you have a separate account but you can use the same email address. And they make it pretty easy to log into all of your workspaces that use the same email address. So we'll send you a link and you can join them all at once. So that's the best thing, is just to use the same email to create the new account.
Yeah, and that's because they don't want, so just think about it, right? So we've got like this volunteer group that has a Slack account, and then we've got like your class account. And you might want to join different Slack accounts, but you don't want the people in your volunteer group to see all the stuff in your class account. So they segregate them by having you create different accounts for each.
Before we jump into the Trello, do you think it makes sense to talk about just we came up with a list of things, but not in order. So to talk
That's
about.
true.
One thing I think that might be worth adding, David pointed out that you're not in competition with each other. I think it's also worth pointing out that we're not expecting you to generate all of the code that you do from scratch by yourself. That might be an expectation in some other kinds of classes, but it's not plagiarism to get help and to copy sample code and to adapt it to your own need. The product that you're producing is the final form and the way that it interacts. Those are all unique. You have something that no one else has finished before. And if you use a code snippet from someone else, that's expected. That's a way to do the work efficiently. And along with that, we really want to encourage you to ask questions frequently and early. In some ways, you're compensating for the fact that you're doing something that hasn't been done before. If we're teaching a case book that has cases that are 300 years old, there's lots of precedent to follow. This is a project that started 6 months ago, and using a tool that was built originally, the DocAssemble platform is about 3 years old. So even that's not that old. There's not the same kind of pedagogical content. So you're being able to ask questions and being willing and ready to do that when you're stuck on things compensates for that fact. And we expect you to, and not to have all the answers on your own, or to necessarily expect you to try to derive them from first principles or from reading the documentation if you get stuck. It's always a good place to start. You'll get an answer faster if it's something that's there and you can find. But we don't expect you to have that be your only resource. So there are a couple of ways for you to ask for help. The first thing is on the A to J Slack channel. And I'll show you that really quickly.
I'm putting a link to join the A to J Slack channel in the Zoom.
So you won't see really good modeling of this yet, but it is something that you can use. So this channel here, the assembly line code channel, is the one. If we were talking about maybe renaming it to questions, I know I don't have the ability to rename the channel, but maybe.
Well, if we wanted to, I just don't want to freak people out. We should let people.
Okay. We can let people know either way. So the thing is, like, this has a lot of people on it. Rather than
Do we want to change it to code questions?
Code questions, sure. So the idea here is this is a place for you to share anything that you're stuck on. You can share sample code. If you run into an error, share the error screen, and you can have peer help to solve the problem, but also David or I or some of the other people who are volunteers on the project might be able to help you move past whatever you're stuck on. We have been pretty freely setting up, Zoom meetings on demand if people are stuck too. So that's another thing that you can do. Is if you feel like it's too hard for you to write down your question, set up a meeting with us and we might be able to help you move past it as well. We don't want people to be stuck on stuff for days if there's a way to solve the problem. And then we have 2 scheduled meetings to help people raise blockers. One is Tuesday at noon, at 12:30 rather. And the other one is on Fridays at 12:30. And those will always be announced here on the main assembly line channel. So you'll see a link there to join those and a reminder before those meetings happen.
And we are now, the channel is now assembly line code questions.
Should we just jump into boards, do you think?
Yeah. So do we all have, everyone has or knows how to get onto the Slack team. And once you get onto the Slack team, you'll have to add yourself to the assembly line channel and the assembly line code questions channel. You can DM either Quentin or myself if you have any questions about exactly what you need to do. But everyone's got that. Everyone knows how to find over there. Visual indication. Yes.
So I recommend everyone get to your Trello account, log in, and you should be able to the full team rather. And we're just going to show you first. Let me just, this is the link to the actual board, so you make sure you're at the right place once you're logged into Trello. And we have 3 boards here that represent the 3 different phases of your final projects and every form that's part of our mass access project. So we start out here with pre-processing. That's getting the form ready to automate. Then we move on to development, which is where most of your time is going to be spent. And there'll be an iterative cycle there where you keep improving and adding new features, hopefully, to your form to make it better. And then we get over to the testing phase. And we did a lot of work yesterday to get these all ready. I think it should be very much like where you should be able to have really clear next steps at each stage. So let's start by going into the pre-processing board together.
And to be clear, next steps doesn't mean not having any questions. It may mean that you have it says do this thing, and you're like, what the heck is that thing? In which case you ask on Slack.
So let's do a sample form here. Let's pretend we can use the one that I think that our class we did last week, which was the military affidavit. Let's just pretend that's our new form. So I'm going to add this, add a card here. And actually, David, what do I do to make it use the template?
Instead of add the card, you just X that out. Just check next to the card. Right there, if you click there. Yeah.
Right. I'm going to create a new card, and you can all do this as you follow along with your forms as well. So I'm going to create a new template-based card from the template card. And I'm going to name it with the name of my form. I call it military affidavit.
Quentin, just to pause for a second, have you talked about Kanban or that process at all with your class?
We haven't yet, no. I was thinking we could kind of do it as we talked about.
Yeah. So maybe we should preview exactly what the heck is the Trello board? Why are we using it? If you'd like to do that, or I can do that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you broke up.
Go ahead, David. Yeah.
Competing with 6-year-olds in the background.
I have one other question too. If it's I don't know if it's the right time, but are we supposed to be following along when we do start following along with your example, or with our own form that we chose?
Go ahead and use your own form.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll be able to move it as far as we'll hypothetically move it through the entire process, but at least that way you will have created a card and your form will be there and ready, and it will reflect where you're at. So just to give a quick bit of history, what we're using is this tool called Trello. Trello allows you to, as you can see, it has sort of these vertical lists, and you can create these things called cards. And what you can do is actually take those cards and drag them from list to list. So it's like a list of to-do lists is kind of one way to think about it. But we're using it as a way to implement something similar in spirit to a project management process called Kanban. Which was developed to help auto manufacturers deal with supply chains. So basically the idea is you have a bunch of parts or things coming in, and you have to figure out how to work on them. And there will be different processes. Say if you're building a car, you're adding this part or you're adding that part. And so those will be our different verticals. In this case, it might be things like we're saying create the card, and then we're saying do a quality check, and then we're saying do a review. And so what would happen with Kanban is you could create a list of all the things that you need to do over on one side. When you're doing them, you drag them into the job that they're being done on. And that provides a visual cue to everyone to say, hey, this is how that part's being used or what's being done. And what you would then do is you would also then limit the number of cards you could have in the verticals at any one time. And that would allow you then to see bottlenecks visually. So if everything's getting bunched up in one vertical, you can say, oh, well, that's where the bottleneck is. And so then management could come in and everyone can sort of all hands help to get through that bottleneck. And it was a nice way to help make sure that you had just on time manufacturing working by eliminating bottlenecks. And the software industry has really adopted this as a process as well, and they tend to think about it as individual features and you move them through. So what we're going to do sort of conceptually is every one of your forms is a card. Where that card exists on these vertical lists is going to tell us what is going on with that card. And that will allow anyone on the team to be able to look at a snapshot and sort of see where things are at. And it then also helps you to establish where you are in the process. And so as Quentin had expressed, we have 3 different boards for these 3 different sort of, eras of your card. The first is pre-processing, then we're doing actual development, then we're doing testing. And so you can then figure out where you are within there. And we've also added a bunch of checklists to these cards, which will help structure your work through those cards. And that's what we're going to go through here. But just to give you the 30,000 foot view, it's a way to sort of keep track of everything from a global perspective and on a very granular perspective. So you can think about the Trello as both like your to-do list and also like your Gantt chart, if any of you know what that is. So it's like a high-level planning tool and don't miss any of the details tool, sort of all rolled into one. Any general questions about that? Or I think it'll make a lot more sense as we go through concretely and move a card through. But that's the idea. All right, then. Let's work on that card.
Okay, so yeah, this looks perfect. So when your card's created, it should look just like this. You're going to use this little pop-up menu there that has a tiny icon of a card, and you're going to click Create Card from the template card. And you'll see that you have that little checklist with 0 out of 29 if your card was created correctly. So I'll let everybody do that, and you can have some time practicing that later. But I want to show you what it's like we'll simulate this card speeding through the process as if we're not doing most of the steps in real time. It would take a lot more time. So you won't necessarily be able to move your card along the full way. And that's actually expected that you won't do that, but you might get a little bit of the stuff done. So I'm going to create my Trello card. Once I've created it, I can move it right onto that list. This buffer could hold a bunch of templates that don't have any card associated with them so far. That's one thing that it could do. So let's open up that card that I just created and let's take a look at what it has on it. So you can see here, we have a little description, which is a placeholder description. And then we have a bunch of checklists, which are numbered. And the idea here is we go through the steps on each checklist. Once that checklist is done, you see at the bottom of each checklist, it says move card to a named column, 1.2 in this case. And then the next checklist is the one that's the most important checklist to start working on. And once you finish all the things on the checklist, then you finish the process and the card can move to the next board. Some of these checklist items are really big when we get to the development side, but for now, the ones here are generally really quite straightforward. But there's still some things that'll take a lot more time to do than others. Let's start with this military affidavit. Let's check off our first thing. So we can do name card. It says form name and type of law. So let's actually do it before we check it off. So the military affidavit, for people who are in my class, we did this exercise. We know this can be used for almost all types of cases. I'm just going to put all there. I actually don't know if that's the right category name in our system. David? I think it is.
I think it is. Or
yeah.
Any, I think.
Some of yours are going to have like a much more clear area of law, like housing or family. I think those tend to be the areas of law that most of your forms do. So now I've done that. I can check off that item. I've created the Trello card for the form, so I can check off that item too. Add link to original form and context to Trello card. Okay, so I can do that too. That may not make as much sense for everybody's forms, but let's do that. And you probably have a better link than what I'm just doing here. And I think it's okay to have it be the context, actually, or should it? And I'm going to upload it as well. So this was an interesting form because it did start out as having a bunch of, I think this was one of the ones that was using Adobe Livecycle, so I had to print a clean copy of it to be able to use it in the browser. If that's a place anyone's stuck, we can help you with that. But what I did to upload it to the card was just to drag and drop it. And you can do the same thing, or you could use the add attachment button if you wanted to. So I have the link and I have the clean copy. And let's just pretend we've done these next steps and I'm ready to move it on to the next one. So after every step of the process, after you've finished a checklist, you can move the card to the buffer. The reason we have these buffers has a lot to do with the fact that we're envisioning this as an assembly line where someone could come in at any stage and do the next step. So there's not really a big buffer between creating the card and doing the priming and quality check. But if those were done by two different people, then that would be a significant place where cards can just wait here until they're actively being worked on in the next list, if that makes sense. So you can see here, we've done those basic things. These are basically just adding metadata to the card so we know more about what the form is and how it works. The next step here is adding fields. And if you look here, the first checklist item has a link to instructions that go over how to add fields to the PDF. And the best example is really for a PDF. For those of you who are working on a Word document, I'm going to add some sample marked up documents here so that you can see how they work. And let me also do this.
And just another thing while Quinn's pointing that out, another rationale for the buffers is that we can then tell that you're done with everything in the preceding checklist, right? As opposed to if you just took it from one checklist and put it in the other, we wouldn't know if you were partway through the next checklist or still waiting, or if someone had even picked it up to start working on it. So it makes a very clear visual indication for those looking at the board that it's done with everything in the preceding checklist and it's waiting to start work on the next one. And so we can then look at where a card is and tell exactly where it is in the process.
Let's see. Let me put this on the assembly line code channel. Okay, so.
So for those of you watching the video, you would go back to October 13th and you would be able to find those same conversations.
Yes. So that's going to be the next step of the process, is adding fields to your form. And I want you to just take a look and read through them. It is kind of written in a narrative way. Once you've read it through once, you're probably going to use it more as a reference just to say, okay, I'm adding a person to the form. What kind of naming convention do I use for a person? And this would tell you how to do it in a PDF or in a docx file. And this explains here, this column, like what the meaning of that label is.
Can we provide some motivation for why it is we're going through all the trouble of making these common names?
When you use those names the correct way, and you run the form through our assembly line wizard tool, which everybody in my class has done. I know in David's class, I think you haven't done that yet, or you may not do it during class time, either way. You'll come out with an output that will run right away if you've done the labels and names correctly. And we've chosen to set things up that way because it'll help us keep things consistent from form to form. So we can ask questions exactly the same way. And we can use the information the questions gather in standard ways. So we're sending a lot of these forms to the court. And in order to create a cover page that tells the clerk, this is a form for this person in this case, we have to ask for the information in a standard way so that we can make use of it on the back end. So that's kind of the main motivation for that.
Saves your work.
Aren't labeled, aren't standards in there. And then you just kind of try to use the general principles that we have.
And it's important to realize that saves you work down the line. If the wizard is creating these things that are standardized, it means you didn't have to figure out exactly how to ask that question or put that forward in the code. So it will just do it for you. So that if you get them, it's going to save you a lot of work and make your life easier to figure out.
So that's the next list. And we get to a quality check stage. So we're going to want to have somebody else look over your form. So we'll ask you to have a peer on the project. It can be someone in the class or someone else from our project who's going to look over your work when you've finished labeling the form. And we'll check to see if it's meeting the standards. And we're going to ask you to do that for each other. So you just have one other pair of eyes on your form. And then you can also pull in someone from our team who's more experienced to have another pass and look it over with you and make sure before you run it through the wizard, do all the names make sense? Are there things that are going to cause you trouble later if you've done it that way? Okay, so let's just pretend we finished that. We're at the review stage. I now realize we're at 10:29, but hopefully we can go just a tiny bit more. We'll go to move the card, and we're going to move it from this board to board number 2. So let's go ahead and go to board number 2. I think having that ability to see how the card moves is probably like the most important thing for you to see. And we're going to just go ahead at this point. We're going to go and add in what we're going to, all of these checklists should be checked off if the card has been moved through. And we're going to add the first checklist from this board. The way that templates work in Trello, we can't have those pre-populated for you. So we're going to have to add in the checklist from here. So they're in order here. We're going to add in the 2.1a because this is a PDF. If it were a docx, I would use 2.1b. I'm going to add that checklist into my card. And now I have a new set of things to start working on. And one thing I'm noticing here is I'm going to add in a link to the wizard here. I thought we had done that somewhere yesterday. It must not have been on this checklist.
Yeah,
but
I think it's in the, I feel like it's in the one above. I feel like it's in the 2.1. There's a 2.1 step before 2.1a.
Okay, so it's just a matter of the order of the cards. Okay, let me try that. Try adding the checklist again. I don't want to give you the wrong example. And we'll make sure.
Maybe there isn't. Let me see it.
Good point. The checklist doesn't seem to be.
Well, it's not it's a different template. Yeah, the mature, is it in the maturity? No, it's not. It's in the development.
I know we added it, so we'll have to figure out why.
2.1b. We only added it to 2.1b.
That's okay.
I'll add it.
That's it. Okay. Yeah, so there's a link to the wizard. We'll have a link on both versions of PDF. Next one. Probably it's already there. So that's the process. Then, so on this board and on the next board, as you're working through and you're dragging it from one column to another, one list to another, you're going to be adding that checklist manually at each stage, working through the items in the checklist, and then getting to the next stage. Okay, I know it's 10:30 now. I think those are the main mechanical things. People will have questions, and I want to make sure people can ask them anytime. But before we sign off, are there questions people have about what we've seen so far?
So this is really, so the Trello is a one-stop sort of stop where you can figure out, orient what you should be working on. And then again, the checklists are not going to necessarily make sense to you first time through, but then they can prompt the proper question for you to ask. So you can be like, hey, it says I need to do X. I don't know what the heck X is. You can ask that question and then we'll help you get there. Or maybe you will know what X is. And when we can, we've tried to provide context by linking to videos and other documentation, but there's no expectation that you should be able to do everything on your own without asking questions. We fully expect people to ask questions and ask lots of questions. In fact, I get nervous when people don't ask questions.
I have one.
You're
Oh,
muted.
you muted yourself. Adriana.
One question is are there any timelines associated with this from when you move from one board to the other? Is it just at your own pace, or if we're trying to do this for a final project, are there recommended weeks that we should be sure we're moving to the next board? Or?
So it's gonna, I can only speak for, so with the hat of the assembly line project in, it's really just sort of when you can get it done. With the hat of your respective classes, you should talk to your respective instructor. From my standpoint, we want to have you getting all the way through testing by the end of the period for you to turn things in. So that's the goal you're trying to get. Some people are going to zoom through it and then they'll do multiple iterations and they'll keep making it better and better. And that's cool too. From my class's standpoint, I want to make sure that you have enough time to pull it all the way through testing so you have completed something.
Yes. And we didn't talk about testing. I think we didn't have quite enough time, but I will say like this, and one more concrete thing to say for like in between milestones for you thinking about, am I on track? You should be right up here to the code interview pretty quickly. I think that will take a couple hours to move through the other stages. Maybe you're waiting for someone to look over your stuff and that can have a delay of a day or two. But you'll be here at coding interview for a while. That's going to be the bulk of your time. And there is a checklist that's specific to that, but there's some big things that go in there. Let's see. I'm going to add that proper checklist here so you can see some of the things that are in there. So it's just 2.2 code interview. So we did try to make it more concrete than it was before, but okay, so work on issues for current milestones. So we're going to add the milestone checklist here too, which isn't that big a checklist actually for milestone 1. But it's like the user can correct, these are really more targets for you to meet. So it's like the user can fill in all of the fields on the PDF. So you're going to have to make sure, go through all the fields, make sure they can all be filled in. If there are areas of the form that aren't used in different circumstances, you're going to have made sure those questions aren't asked. But you might get stuck on something about how to ask a certain question that can slow you down, and you'll be working and troubleshooting it, asking for help until you get to the next stage. This is where most of the work is going to be happening. This is using it's the part that uses the most coding skills, and that's not part of the project, but you'll be able to get help for sure.
And again, these are just to orient you and maybe to help you figure out what questions to ask. And a good general rule is if you're sort of spinning your wheels, if you like to spinning your wheels for more than 30 minutes, you should just ask a question. A real person is going to help direct you much more quickly. And that's if there's one thing I could say that is the most important thing, it's just ask questions when you have them. The worst scenario is you don't ask the questions, or you wait because you want to do it yourself, and then you find yourself having spent up hours for something that someone could just directed you in 30 seconds to go read something somewhere. And that might sound frustrating. It's like, what, I even spend hours doing something that should take 30 seconds? And the answer is yes, that would be frustrating if you let it come to that. Don't let it come to that. Just ask a question.
There's also the phenomenon of just because it's something that we can answer quickly for you doesn't mean that it wasn't a good or a hard question. It's just that we've had the experience to get to it. I know you used the Pablo Picasso example. It's a good one, but I wanted to say, actually, there's something we should add this in as a checklist item too. David, either you or I should do it after this. But I should explain what these maturity milestones are. That is something you're going to assign in order to your card as well. And you're going to all start out with milestone 1 and then pretty quickly move to milestone 1.5. And I think all of your forms, if you're aiming to, I think, meet expectations for most of our courses, is going to be milestone 2. And then up maybe to some parts of milestone 3, but not expecting you to finish that. But the reason for these milestones is to help people have deliverable work at every stage. So then you can say, okay, my thing runs through to the end. I'm not going to add features that are really complex and fancy until I know it runs through the end, and then I can publish it at that point. And I'll add my features without breaking the existing code in between. But you will add these in progressively in order when you're on the coding list. You'll try to meet these particular features for each milestone. When you reach the end of the milestone, you see here we have publish on live site as one of the options that can happen depending on what form it is. Some of the forms we won't be allowed to do that, and some of them.
Yes, so the milestones are differentiated from the checklists for what column you go in. So you might not have finished all the milestone check items, but you will have moved to a different column because you have the column checklist that are helping you move through there.
Yeah, so once you've finished all of milestone 1, then you can still do the things like reviewing with the SME, having plain language review, doing the testing, and you might just have another round of those things when you get it to the final finished stage of your form, which is milestone 2 or 3. But we need to add a milestone card to one of our checklist items here, I think. So we'll make sure to do that. You'll be on the first board for a while, but when you get to the second board, we'll make sure that's a checklist item, so it's clear that that's what that means.
Are these boards just for our group, the people who are working in these 2 classes, or are there other forms being done by people and volunteers elsewhere that are using these?
The answer is yes, in that these are new boards we put together in response to some old ones we had. So we're going to start having everyone use these same boards that you're using, but there are still some people using a legacy set of boards for existing forms that people have working.
You can see these were our old boards, and the new ones were designed to just make the process a lot more efficient and easy to manage than the original boards we had. Originally, we weren't using checklists so much, so there were a lot of lists, and people ended up just not returning back to the Trello because it was too hard to manage it once they got through the first phase of things, essentially. So these are, you can take a look at this board if you wanted to see. It's a public board, but I don't want you to get confused that this is the one that you need to reference. So I'm just going to put it on the Zoom chat for you to peek at, but don't use this as the one to do any of your work.
Yeah, so that I'm aware of everyone's time. Does anyone have any questions that they think would be good to ask for the audience here or those watching? And I just want to confirm we are, as was heard when we came on here, we're recording this. We're going to share it with the other members. What I will likely do is share this video on YouTube as an unlisted video, which is say people would have to just have the link. So if they got to our documentation, they can get to it. Please let me know if you have an issue with, because by default, everyone's images are saved. If you have an issue with that, please let me know, and then I can crop out the videos for anyone. But otherwise, I will just post this. It doesn't show your names in the recording. It would just show your faces. If that's an issue, please DM me or let me know, and then I will adjust accordingly. But if I do not need to crop out everyone's faces, I will not crop it. Okay. This was just an orientation to get you oriented. Do people feel oriented? Okay.
Oh yeah, the next step, everyone should have their cards up on the board soon, and then starting to move on to the labeling stages of your forms. So.
All right. I look forward to seeing all the great work you're going to do. I mean, how often do you get to do a final project that's actually helping people, like in the real world? Like that's kind of cool. I know for me, it's been like psychologically one of the things that's helping me get through this very weird semester, is knowing that I'm doing something that's helping. So hopefully that is a benefit for you as well. So thank you. And Quentin, do you want to close us out?
Just really want to echo what David said. Thanks everybody for being part of this project. I'm excited to see what everybody works on as well.
Yes, I'm one of those people that waves goodbye at Zoom meetings.
Bye. No, it says bye too.